For player profiles, in-depth features and exclusive interviews, visit sfhandbook.com to learn more about the best young football players in the world. Hello everybody, welcome to the Scouted Football Podcast, your home of under-23 football, under-23 players, interesting case studies, storylines and analysis. With 2021 drawing to a close, we've got a bit of a different episode to finish the year. I'm well aware there's quite a lot of information and plenty of names to take in during any given episode. I've even found myself forgetting certain players exist that have been discussed on the podcast. So the end of the year is perhaps the best time to revisit some of the predictions and the takes that we got right or were ahead of the curve on over the course of the year. Haven't clipped up those that we got wrong, funnily enough, of which there are plenty, which are available on request. But without further ado, here is the Scouted Football Podcast review of 2021. In episode 54 back in February, I was joined by Lewis Ambrose, who had plenty to say on Silas Womangi Tuka, as he was known at the time. Silas had scored 11 goals from an unconventional right wing-back stroke right-sided forward position under manager Pellegrino Matarazzo in the Bundesliga, before suffering a serious ligament injury which kept him out for several months. During that time, it came to light that a former agent of Silas's had falsified documents with regards to the player's age and his real name in order for Silas to become dependent on him. Now, free from the constraints of that particularly macabre situation and back on the pitch after his injury, here's what we had to say about Silas Katompa Mvumpa, as he's now correctly known. Then the player that we're going to discuss first is Silas Womangi Tuka, who is a fantastic forward who has been effectively playing as a right wing back. If you want to keep him sort of penned into a position on the pitch, but realistically he's a forward who's become a wide forward this season at Stuttgart. After being, very, very good at being sort of a centre forward at Paris FC in Ligue 2 in France. He's very much a player that I'm really, really excited to watch more of, to learn more of, because his stats speak for themselves. 11 goals, 3 assists in 19 games in his first Bundesliga season. That's, they're pretty abnormal numbers. And I suppose that in itself is a reflection of how well the counter-attacking, the aggressive style, the system which really, really emphasizes his physical traits at Stuttgart.
Well, Mangatuka, if you describe to somebody how he plays, somebody will be picturing a kind of short, possibly stocky, but maybe not winger. And he's really not. He's, long-legged and rangy. And you'd sort of see him and you'd sort of put him in midfield, I think, just on site. You'd put him in centre midfield and expect him to get up and down the pitch. In fact, he is playing a role that I cannot even begin to describe. He's completely unique as far as I've ever seen, certainly in German football or in the Premier League. He is playing, I don't know, as you say, ostensibly as a right wing back if you want to box him in a position. And Stuttgart tend to defend with a 5 across the back, and he's the right wing back. And then when they get the ball, he becomes the right winger, but they don't give it to him. They completely ignore him. He barely touches the ball. But when he does touch it, he just runs, and he has the wherewithal and the technical ability and physical capability to run at incredible speed and keep control of the ball and cause absolute mayhem for anybody who tries to defend against him. He's got the most shots in the team, but he's also got the second or third most tackles in the team. He's almost like playing like a right back, but then when he gets the ball, he's playing like you'd expect sort of Wilfried Zaha to play or something.
January's just around the corner, and Everton look poised to sign Ukrainian international Vitali Mikolenko. He's been someone I've personally been familiar with for a number of years owing to his time with the Ukrainian youth international sides, but has been a mainstay at left-back and centre-back for Dynamo Kiev over the past couple of seasons. Zoya Londonsk's Andrew Toros gave his appraisal of the Everton-bound defender back in March. in terms of his potential as a left wing back in a top 5 European leagues side. Obviously, he's been playing in a back four with Dinamo because obviously the dominance that they have over the rest of the teams in the league, bar Shakhtar, means that you don't have to do as much defending. But I think with his versatility, it makes him an interesting one because he can obviously play left back, he can play left-sided centre back as he has played in the Ukrainian youth teams, and has played this season. It's pretty much 50-50 really, isn't it, how he's split his time this season under Cheschko. So there's clearly something in his game which says that despite that spindly 6'1" frame of his, he can actually play as an athletic fullback or as a centre half. In terms of if he were to get a move similar to Sihankov, whenever that may be, where would you see him playing in sort of if he did get a move to a top 5 European league? Because I've always had my suspicions. I think that in a back four where maybe you're asked more tactically, where you are exposed a lot more if you dive into tackles too much, I think he could be a bit more exposed in a tougher division.
I guess there is that risk, but I guess his sort of biggest games that he's had, especially at left back, have been in for Ukraine, like the actual senior national team. I went and watched him play against Portugal in a 0-0 draw at the start of 2019, and he basically pocketed Ronaldo that night. Obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo is not who he once was, but I mean, still, it was one of those games where it was like a sort of career-defining moment where it's like, oh, this is a watershed. This guy's going to be big. And I think that the best place for him to go to would be Serie A to start off with, because obviously a sort of an experienced coach might be able to sort of help him with that fullback duality of playing in defence and in attack at the same time. As you've said, he's played in centre-back a number of occasions. That's definitely not his first choice position. It's just if required, if there's injuries or something like that. But he's great at crossing. He's up and down that left-hand side consistently, heaps of energy and pace. And I think he's, I think he's got what it takes. I just think he just needs a bit more, probably more consistent playing time against better, wide men, and maybe that might help him in terms of his experience with those defensive frailties.
In episode 58, I spoke with the Belgian football podcast's Ben Jackson, who explained why Albert Sambi Lokonga was destined for bigger things than Belgium's top flight. A few months later, he was Arsenal's and has made a good start to life at the Emirates. One of the younger players who's played a starring role, I think, over the past 2 seasons, despite some difficult times, is Albert Sambi Lokonga, who is a deep line number 8, very good dribbler, very good at beating players, getting through pressure, makes lots of progressive runs from midfield. And one of the things that I found quite interesting, sort of just watching Lokonga, is that, for a deep line midfielder, he's not quite a defensive midfielder. He doesn't get through a great deal of defensive work that you may associate with players who are good at escaping pressure, who can be just as good disruptively as well. I quite like how he's good at picking passes in the final third. His pass selection is quite good for a player so young. And progressing play in sort of those dangerous spaces, because we see often young players are very good up until that final moment where their pass maybe is a bit misguided or isn't as accurate as it could be, or they just start again, turn around, pass back to where they came from. But Lokonga appears to have sort of got that refined down to a bit of a science, because he's very good at playing those incisive balls.
Yeah, no, I'm a massive Lokonga fan. Anderlecht games haven't always been the most exciting to watch, but he's exciting to watch. Like you said, I think the biggest thing you notice is the way he can just pick up the ball and take it a couple of 10, 15, 20 yards down the field, beat a couple of players. He gets fouled so often. I think there was a game earlier in the season I watched where he played against Beerschot, and he was just running rings around them. His progression from and transition play was just causing them all sorts of problems, because he'd just take players out of the game for fun. I think the problem Lokonga's found is that with Tau gone, all the like kind of creative pressure's been put on his shoulders. And so teams are kind of looking to stop him as often as possible, because if you stop him, you kind of stop Anderlecht playing. One team that didn't do that early in this season was Genk. There was a game where they just didn't put any pressure on him, and he just looks in so much control. Like you said, his passing was fantastic. I think they only won like 1-0, but the amount of chances he created for the side was just ridiculous. Like he should have better numbers in terms of assists than that this season, but he's kind of just been let down by the players around him. He is, in my mind, their biggest asset at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt. He's been given the captaincy as well. He's a leader on the pitch. He just, everything he does just oozes with class, and like he's just a quality technician as well. I'd be very, very, very shocked if he is still there next season. I think, like we talked about, knowing when the right time to sell is, I think his kind of price tag's only going up at the moment, and I'd be shocked if there aren't clubs already having conversations with Anderlecht about him.
Regular guest on the podcast and professional football scout Lee Scott had to make an appearance in this 2021 roundup. He and I discussed then Ligue 2 side Clermont Foot, who were on course to make their first appearance in the top flight in their history. At the end of the season, Clermont were promoted to Ligue 1, largely due to the goals of Mohamed Bayo. As things stand, Bayo has 9 goals in 17 Ligue 1 appearances this season, proving that he was indeed capable of picking up where he left off in the second tier. He's 6'2" tall. He's quite a presence on the pitch. And the first thing that I've got in my notes is that he's a knees up sprinter. Because it seems as though whenever he goes through on goal, his knees are almost touching his chest, because he's just powering these legs to try and get onto the ball. He's got a huge cadence, a huge gait to get onto the ball. And sort of when he does latch onto it, unlike other players, typically more diminutive players, it's not as though he's cutting back onto a favoured foot and waiting for reinforcements. He's always sort of powering through. And I think it would be a mischaracterization to say that he is purely a player who is, someone who can play on the shoulder and go through on goal. That is true. He can play like that, but he also does have quite intelligent penalty box movement from what I've seen. He tends to arrive at the right time, doesn't break his stride, which I mean, I'm not comparing him to him, but it's the same sort of thing that Erling Haaland does, that we see for Dortmund in that near post run at the left-hand side. When the ball is coming across from the left, he never seems to break stride. And that allows him to get a clean strike on the ball. It's almost like he just arrives right place, right time, and that's a hallmark of good strikers. And it's very similar in terms of Bayo's striking. He tends to get on the end of cutbacks really well. I think he's got around 30 goals in the past 2 seasons at Ligue 2 level. And at Championnat National, where he was out on loan last season. So there's scope to say that he's risen to the challenge in Ligue 2 this season with Clermont Foot. And I mean, top level, I think you may be pushing it in terms of his ceiling, his potential. But I do see some sort of similarities. It's actually quite funny, because I see similarities between him and Famara Diédhiou, who is of Bristol City, who was also at Clermont Foot before getting moved to England. And I think the Championship is probably a league that Bayo would probably do quite well in. He's physical enough, but he's also smart enough to make that step up.
I first became aware of Bayo when he was playing on loan at Dunkirk in the lower tiers. I was doing some lower tier scouting using data, and Bayo's numbers just stood right out. So of course I went and had a look, and at first you're looking at him and you're going, I'm not convinced, because it looks ungainly. You're right, with the knees right up, and he goes through on goal, and he's so single-minded. But then after a period of time, when a player, even at that level and then at second tier level, when they start to show the level of output that he does in terms of, I mean, to be honest, his goal involvements are goals per 90. They're not really assists per 90. He's not a false nine. He's not a creator. He probably makes more opportunities for teammates, because opposition defences are so scared of him that they cluster closer together towards him and then create space elsewhere. It's similar to the concept of gravity in basketball, when a really effective attacking player creates room by teammates just for being positioned in the penalty area. But when a player of this type starts to produce those kind of goal outputs, you have to pay attention, because one way or the another, he's scoring goals. And at the end of the day, if he's scoring a goal, who cares if it goes in off his shin, off his knee, or off a first-time half volley that he's timed really well? But then you look at him a little bit more closely, and it's those double movements in the penalty area. It's arriving at speed in the penalty area, but then adjusting the angle of his attack really quickly so that defenders don't know he's about to burst past him on the left or the right. And it's those little pieces of information that make him stand out in terms of his goal output. I think you're right. I think at the top level, we're not sure. He is somebody who I think would score goals in Liga to a point, because that profile of striker tends to do well in Liga. It's players who have that powerful running style. He's probably good for 10, 12, maybe even 14 goals in Liga next season if they go up. And that would be great for a club like Clermont-Foot. But you have to wonder exactly where his level will come, where he'll level off, and where he'll come up against defences that will start to play him a little bit smarter, if you like, and not give him the space to run behind.
Conor Gallagher's kicked on during his loan with Crystal Palace this season after similar stints with Charlton, Swansea and West Brom. Orlando Valman from the Chelsea spot spoke to us about what lies ahead for the England under-21 international in episode 60. Do you see potentially in future that them being Chelsea's level, being Champions League level, or are we going to see sort of probably a similar situation to Ugbo where they've done well, but perhaps not well enough to oust the players in their positions at sort of the base of midfield?
Well, I think Conor Gallagher potentially could be. Well, actually, I think there's a very good chance of him being a Chelsea player in the long term. I don't think he'll be a starter. I'm not sure if he quite has the individual quality for that, but he's a player who's very comfortable at all three of 6, 8, and 10. So he can play any midfield role. He can play out wide. He's a manager's dream. He's a bit like Mason Mount in that sense. You know, he's very tactically aware. He does the basics brilliantly. You know, he never wastes time on the ball, never takes extra touches. His passing is very crisp and sort of refined. And, you know, he's got very good technical ability to go on top of that as well. So I think he's kind of your dream, I guess, 23rd man in an international squad or squad player in the Premier League. So I think, you know, if he wants to be a starter, maybe he won't be playing at Chelsea level, or at least not for a few years. But I think, you know, even this summer or maybe next summer, he can come back to Chelsea and play a good 1,000, 2,000 minutes in a season.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with you there on Gallagher, because seeing him at Charlton, he was in a reasonably rudimentary championship team at that time under Lee Bowyer. He was that real spark of quality, and as you were saying, his ability to dig in, to tuck in as a bit of a six, when Charlton were really under the cosh, was impressive. But then his ability to sort of break forward and really add goals at the other end of the pitch was really good. And then obviously at Swansea, he turned into very much a creative force. And this season in the Premier League has obviously been, a huge education for him at West Brom. So yeah, I think he's very much on an upward trajectory.
The other thing to say about him is more about kind of how he is as a person and his mentality. You know, he spent 6 months in a team in the bottom half of the Championship. He spent 6 months in a team in the top half of the Championship, and he went straight to Premier League. And, he's being awarded Man of the Match awards in the Premier League, proving that he can be the best player on the pitch in Premier League games. And he's done that all in the space of kind of 18 months. And, if he can develop that far in 18 months, then, you never know what the future might hold.
Tifo Football and the Athletics' Alex Stewart was kind enough to give up his time to speak about a club curiously close to his heart, FC Sochaux Montbéliard in France's Ligue 2, on episode 69. Towards the end of that instalment, we discussed up-and-coming winger Alain Virginius, who we're seeing the best of with France's under-19s. On the crib sheet that I've got here, I listed him as 2003 born, right-footed left winger, and then I started watching him, and it was a case of, well, he's a winger who plays on both sides, and he's decent with both feet, but he's predominantly right-footed. But yeah, he does used predominantly off the bench, but sort of with enough regularity to suggest that in the next few seasons, if not next season, then definitely the season afterwards, he's essentially being groomed for a greater role, but potentially in the event that somebody like Lasme would move on, because there's a lot of, I think you'll probably agree with me on this one, Alex, but there's a lot of growing room, I think, for Virginius, because at the moment he is very much an 18-year-old playing professional football. He's rangy, but he's not physical as yet. He can be a little bit naive when it comes to retrieving the ball with his pressure. Gives away quite a few fouls in areas where a stickler or a footballing traditionalist might say, well, that's not a foul. But as soon as you feel the contact as a defender in a difficult situation, you're going to go down. But with Virginius, I like him because he does have that little spark that when you watch it, you go, yeah, he's got it. The cute little touches around the corner, a little bit past an opponent. If they're going to commit and try to tackle him, then he already has the know-how to beat a player in that position.
I really like him as an orthodox right winger. And you're absolutely right about the physicality and some of the naivety in defending. And I do think that that's a system thing. That's he's being encouraged to press and tackle back like the other Sochaux wide players, and he's just a bit, occasionally too enthusiastic. And yeah, there's in a league like Ligue 2, there's always going to be, for every 18-year-old whippet coming on, there's also a 35-year-old fullback who's been doing it in his sleep for the last 20 years, and we'll know exactly when to go down and stuff. But what I like about him particularly is the way that he stands up crosses from the right-hand side, where he'll use the acceleration to beat a player, and then the ball that comes in is, he doesn't cut it back low along the ground a huge amount, or it's not like that's his go-to thing, like a lot of wide players that are really kind of almost attacking midfielders, but that end up in a wide area because that's where they're needed. They pull the ball back across the ground an awful lot, whereas he will clip across in aerially often and really well at pace. And there is something slightly kind of old school about the way he crosses the ball that does make me think of him as like an orthodox. I mean, if he got a bit more strength about him, he would be a fantastic right winger in a classic 4-4-2. Because he's got what you want. He can beat a player, he can cross the ball at pace, he can add a bit of curve to it, and he can also, like I say, stand it up. So he's not over hitting the cross, he's kind of chipping it in, but he's doing it while he's moving. And it's nice to see crossing like that. He almost crosses more like you'd expect a fullback to cross than a winger, if that makes sense.
In episode 76, the other Bundesliga's Lee Wingate foresaw Karim Adeyemi rising to the challenge of Champions League football, as well as a breakout season leading the line for FC Red Bull Salzburg. He's bound for a big move in 2022, Borussia Dortmund looking a likely destination, as he follows the path trodden by Erling Haaland before him. The season began last week with a round of matches, one of which FC Red Bull Salzburg won, which is not at all surprising. I'm sure you'll agree with me there, Lee. They beat Sturm Graz 3-1, and there was 2 Karim Adeyemi goals and 1 Karim Adeyemi assist. So that is probably a little bit of a precursor to what will be the one of the long-running themes in this Austrian Bundesliga season. He started up front with Benjamin Cheschko, who's an 18-year-old striker. Adeyemi himself is only 19. But they looked extremely exciting. They've definitely been on the radar for a little while. They did very well at Liefering, very well in the UEFA Youth League. And now their time has come at the pinnacle of their Austrian careers at FC Red Bull Salzburg.
Yeah, it seems like to start the opening game of the season, it seems like they must be relatively high up the priority list for the new coach, Matthias Jessler, who has actually worked with both of them, Cheschko more than Adeyemi, within the Liefering setup. And yeah, Adeyemi had an absolute blinder. Red Bull Salzburg actually went behind. There was an own goal, which was awarded following the first ever decisive VAR intervention in Austrian football, because that's only been introduced this summer. So Salzburg found themselves a goal down. But then they came back and Adeyemi scoring 2 goals, the second of which was an absolutely lovely left-footed half volley from outside the penalty area, and producing a lovely, lovely cross, perfectly weighted to set up Rasmus Christensen for the other goal. So he's had a flying start to the season after what was perhaps not an entirely plain sailing season for him last season, because he was sort of initially in this role where he was between Liefering and Salzburg, and he got a bit of criticism from Jesse Marsch, public criticism, which is not really something that Jesse Marsch did, so it was a bit of an outlier. He said he wasn't ready and he was making the wrong decisions, but he seems to have started this season all guns blazing, and he'll definitely be one to watch. And it just seems to me, observing Salzburg over the last few years, as if, as I mentioned at the start of this episode, they just get younger and younger and younger all the time. They've got a strike partnership who, between them, are the same age as one of the other club's main strikers. So it goes to show just how young this Salzburg team is, and just how good they are as well.
Episode 85 saw youth football expert Jonathan Fadugba make a scouted debut, and it didn't disappoint. We discussed Premier League 2, the top 2 divisions of under-23 football in England, as well as exploring some case studies of sides who've done well providing a pathway to the first team, including Aston Villa and Leeds United.
They're 2 very good case studies because mainly because of just the aggression in their recruitment strategies, to be honest. So I'm not surprised kind of that you've highlighted them. I think when you look at the 2, what are the similarities? Well, as I've just mentioned, they both really taken it seriously. Start with Villa, maybe. They've got Johan Lange, who's the sporting director, and Mark Harrison, their academy manager. When he joined, I think there was a famous quote that did the rounds within Birmingham where he said he wants to make Aston Villa the club that everyone wants to go to, and they've been very aggressive in the way they've looked to kind of scout and recruit players. A good example, maybe Ben Crazine from Exeter City, 17-year-old England youth international who Liverpool and Chelsea were both reportedly quite keen on, and of course he's kind of turned up at Villa, and there's many others. I mean, there's many that have come through their own academy system themselves that have emerged through their academy. I'm a massive fan of Chukwuemeka. I think he is a real prospect, and another one who ranked incredibly highly. There's 2 of them, of course. So Amin Khani, he was described as the best 16-year-old in the country at the time when he sort of first emerged, and he's very much a kind of talented, composed sort of live, sort of athletic central midfield player, brilliant touch and technique. Villa obviously did extremely well in the Youth Cup as well, and they had a lot of players come through, from that Youth Cup winning team. Louis Barry, for example, is another one who's doing well. You mentioned Cameron Archer, I think. Or I think we were going to talk about maybe Cameron Archer, who started this season very well. Mm-hmm. There's so many players. Obviously, Jacob Ramsey, like you've mentioned. Villa are taking it very seriously in the way they recruit, and I think it's part of a wider strategy for Aston Villa. I think their survival may be hinged on a goal line decision a couple of years ago, for anyone who might remember it. But I think since their survival, they've really approached how they're going to go about the next sort of 5 to 10 years in a very strategic way, and I think we will start to see sort of bear the fruits of that.
Episode 87 launched a new series which will continue into 2022, Road to Qatar, profiling the players who've stood out across the federations during 2022 World Cup qualifying. We began in South America with esteemed journalist and broadcaster Tim Vickery. With a focus on Ecuador, we chatted why 2022 could be the culmination of the South American country's golden generation. Back to sort of the football and what's happening on the pitch, and obviously we mentioned there Brazil, Argentina, and the 2 teams who look destined for a place at Qatar 2022. But beneath them, it's far from a foregone conclusion. Ecuador currently in 3rd with 17 points, but tailed quite closely by Colombia, Uruguay, and a little further back Chile. But with Ecuador, you touched on it earlier, and you also spoke about the under-20s, and that's something I really want to go into a little bit of depth on, especially on this podcast, of course, because we watched the under-20 World Cup in 2019 with a real keenness, and Ecuador finishing 3rd at that competition. were one of the most entertaining sides. And
they were South American champions as well.
Well, exactly, going into that competition, they came with a reputation, and it was pretty clear to see. And I've got listed down here. I don't know whether, I think a few of them, maybe Gonzalo Plata had made his senior debut before that competition, but 8 of the 21 in that squad are now, as of the last round of matches, full debutants, which I think is probably the highest rate of return of any squad at that 2019 Under-20 World Cup. So that shows that, I mean, first of all, it's definitely a pathway there, but also, again, it speaks to the level of importance that the Sudamericano Under-20 or Sub-20, the importance that holds in South America. But, from a young player's perspective, Tim, I mean, the 2002 and 2006 World Cups for Ecuador were probably, the highlights of their international footballing career. So, or international footballing story so far, given that it was back-to-back World Cups. It was the first time they'd qualified in 2002. But from an individual player's perspective, would you be so bold to say that perhaps the group that we are seeing at the moment could be described as potentially a golden generation of Ecuadorian football?
Perhaps. There are some interesting things going on in Ecuadorian football, despite everything. It lives in administrative chaos. There was a huge fuss when there was a kind of coup inside the Ecuadorian FA, and for a while it wasn't clear who the president of the Ecuadorian FA was. They had an expensive rebranding where they switched a very interesting badge for a very shit one. They hired Jordi Cruyff briefly as a high-profile European coach.
I saw that. It was so odd.
He resigned before he'd even taken over a game. But if you look at club level, despite everything, there's interesting things going on. Barcelona of Guayaquil have been, since the Copa Libertadores, our Champions League, since it's been a year-long thing. It was expanded in 2017 from being pushed into the first half of the year to year-long, it's definitely benefited the wealthier clubs from the wealthier countries. Barcelona of Guayaquil are the only side from outside Brazil and Argentina who've made 2 semi-finals. And Guayaquil is sea level. You can't pin that one on the altitude of Quito. But that's remarkable. In Ecuador at club level is consistently outproducing Colombia. Colombia is so much bigger and, has so many more urban centers. Independiente del Valle from the outskirts of Quito are a model club in terms of youth development. They take it really seriously. And investors have gone there because they have seen the raw material potential of the young Ecuadorian footballer. And Independiente del Valle are producing, selling, on and on and on it goes. So that there are some really interesting players coming out of Ecuadorian football. And I was a big fan of that under-20 generation. Interestingly, at the start of last year, we had the under-23 tournament back, the Olympic qualifiers. Where in the Olympic Games you can have some ringers in, but for the qualification tournament it is only under 23. And Ecuador basically took their under 20 side, that side that you're talking about, who had been third in 2019. They took that side, and it didn't work for them at all. Which I suppose one of the points here is the under 20 is vital. And this was the first under 23 that we'd had since 2004. So, for all of those years, the closest thing that we had to the senior side was the under 20s. And the under 20s, they have taken on extreme importance in South American football. Some of the most important players haven't been able to make that gap yet. I mean, the under 20 side that you mentioned, one of the best, but delightful little player to watch was the little left-footed playmaker, Reza Bala.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I
remember. Very physically fragile, and he struggled to make the move up. Another one who was great there was the left-footed centre forward, Campana. who Wolves picked up.
Yes.
But he's not quite physical enough. He's not there. And so he struggled. They tried to fast track him into the national team, and it hasn't really worked. And he's been bouncing around from club to club. So it's an imperfect process. Not everyone comes through. If you look at Ecuador now, I think they could certainly do with players in those positions better than some of the ones that they've got. And Angel Mena has been a revelation in these qualifiers, but he's getting on a little bit. Enna Valencia and Estrada up front, I think that can be improved on. But yeah, there are plenty of promising players in other positions, and it does seem to be a very, very interesting generation that's coming through.
And finally, in episode 90, the knowledgeable and effusive-voiced John McKenzie gave us the lay of the land at SC Freiburg in the Bundesliga. In particular, we discussed young central defender Nico Schlotebeck, who I have a feeling we'll be hearing a great deal more about in 2022. The individuals, there's one in particular who obviously stands out from a scouted perspective, and that is Nico Schlotebeck, who you kindly penned for us in the latest volume of the Scouted Football Handbook, volume 12. On my sheet here, the first question I've got for you, John, is why is Nico so great?
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I think obviously when you're watching Freiburg, I think Schlotterbeck is someone who stands out. I should say Nico Schlotebeck because his brother is there as well and does occasionally play. But what I think, stands out as particularly a ball-playing centre back. We live in an age where the ability to have a good ball-playing centre back is an asset for any football club, and he is particularly impressive at it. He is someone who gets the ball forward by carrying it a lot, and you'll often see him marauding forward towards the edge of the box. Freiburg's whole left side really is built up around their attacking. So they've got their more attacking players on that side, players like Christian Günther, the left back or left wing back who recently debuted for Germany. They've also got Vincenzo Grifo as well over on that side. And I guess Nicolas Höfler, the centre midfielder, although maybe less of an attacking figure, but again, a player who is good at interplay, able to help transition ball forward as well. So the whole left side is built up around moving the ball into more dangerous areas, and Nico Schlotebeck is a left-footed centre back and is involved in that ball carrying and movement down the field. And yeah, he's just brilliant at it. He's able to take the ball around players. He's able to play the ball passing as well. He likes to play big booming crossfield balls, which I think again always stands out. But despite the fact that he is a ball playing centre back, actually also very, very strong defensively as well, has really impressive 1v1 metrics defensively as well, which I think stands out. And I think for me this season, what's really impressed has been the fact that he's come up against world-class players in players like Erling Haaland and Robert Lewandowski, and has looked comfortable against them.
I hope you enjoyed that little trip down memory lane. They were some of my personal highlights from 2021. And I'd just like to finish by thanking each and every one of you listening as regularly as you do. Please remember to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. Yes, you can do that there now. Or wherever you get your pods. And we'll be back in 2022 with plenty more where that came from. Stay safe, take care, Happy New Year. Bye for now.